Hello, and welcome to video number 39 in the Mega Man series. In this video, we're going to be doing changes, and this is volume 1. So we're 38 videos in. This is now video number 39, and as I've been developing, little issues come up here and there, and I figure right before the very finale, which is the next video after this, why not address all those little problems? So we're going to be taking a look at everything from enemies to camera transitions to all sorts of stuff, and we're going to make all the little fixes in this video. So we're going to get started right now. So the first issue we're going to resolve is something that I didn't think was going to be around because I thought I had resolved it a long time ago. But if you followed video number 19 on the energy bars and the color swapping, we ended up using a color swapping shader. And there's a script called ColorSwap that was supposed to be applied to the player and onto the prefab. But for the longest time, it hasn't been there. The shader's there for the material and everything, but the script is not. So that needs to be added. So if you obviously didn't do that video, then you don't need to do this part, right, if you're using your own shader or whatever. But in this case, it needs to be added so that we have the script on our prefab so that we can always have that around, because otherwise it's going to error out and he's going to stay his ray color because he hasn't had his color applied. And that's what the whole color swapping thing is about. So that is now hopefully going to stay, and it's on now prefab. But the thing about that is when you're doing it on the prefab, it's probably going to reapply it to all the objects that you have in other scenes and all that. So you're going to have to go and update all the other scenes. So like for instance, in this scene, if I back out of this, and then I go look at my player guy up here, which is right here, because I had already manually added it, I now have 2 of them. So you may want to remove one of these because otherwise it's going to not work. So get rid of that, and then you just do it in all your other scenes. So like I would have to do it in the main scene. And then I also have a copy of him in the intro. Let's get rid of this extra. And save it, and that should be it. So anytime we add him to another scene, it should always be there, so we will try that out. I just picked a random scene that doesn't have anything in it, so I'm going to add my player, and it only has the one color swap script. So that should hopefully resolve that issue. So in this part, we're going to be making changes to our bullet shoot position, our animations, our sprite, and our box collider, because there are some issues, especially came up when I was doing the tile maps, where his box collider is too big, and if you start running against a wall or some sort of object that's in your way, you can see that he bounces. That's because I have the box collider change sizes as he's moving, which shouldn't. And when he shoots, for instance, like this, you see he actually shifts himself back, but he should basically, the pivot's wrong. So the pivot should stay in the center of the where his legs are spread, so he shouldn't do that kind of a movement. So we're going to make those sorts of changes right now. What you're going to do is on the player shoot sprite, you're going to change it from, I think it was set to center. You're going to change it from center to custom, and you're going to change the pivot to 0.4. So it's back here on his heel. Because if you actually look at the rest of these, that's where they are as well. So except for that one, obviously, but that's kind of like in the center of his foot. And then on his heel here. If you look up here, for instance, on his run, it's also in the center, like on his heel. So we change that pivot. He shouldn't basically push himself backward when he's taking a shot. He should kind of look like he's leaning forward, which would be normal. So let's save that. We're going to go back over here. Let's just play it. See if that's resolved. So you can see he doesn't push back. He looks like he leans forward. Leans forward to take the shot. So that looks a lot better than it did before. Next, what we're going to look at is his box collider size. He's too wide, especially when he was in the tile map stage. He wouldn't fit through like the ladder parts, and it's just, he was just too big. So what I ended up doing is I ended up shrinking it down so it's more closer in, and I feel it's like the right size for him. So basically what you're going to do is you're going to change your box collider to the offset of x of 0, and then y is 0.105, and the size of x is going to be 0.11, and the y is going to be 0.19, and that's going to be for his box collider. You, of course, can use whatever values you feel is right for your game and your player, but I'm going with these values for this. And after that, we're going to check the bullet shoot position, and I don't remember what the original values were, but I did change it. So now I have it at 0.12 for the X and 0.12 for the Y. And if I go back over to my player, I did make a couple other changes in here in the player controller script. So I forgot what the value was, but the climb speed I point here to 0.525 because this is the 1.5 scale size that I've been using for my 16:9 resolution. And so I need to change that. So that's the climb speed that I'm going to use for this scale. And then the sprite height's actually going to be 0.36, where in the tile map it's 0.24. So those are the two changes to that. And I also changed them, I believe, in the script here. So climb speed, climb speed 0.35, no, that's wrong. So that's supposed to be 525 here. And then for the sprite height, that's 36. So we'll save that. Come back over here. Refresh. Still there. Okay. So then the animations. Now, because I have changed my box collider size, and it's a lot of these animations, the box collider size changes as he's moving and stuff. So on my idle, if I had, now these are all the final versions, so I don't have the previous ones anymore. So on the player idle, I don't have any offset changes or box size changes. So that's for this one. So for the, we'll just start at the very top. For the climb, I think this is the same, but I'm pretty sure I had to for the ladder climbing episode or video. I had a bunch of stuff that was basically overriding these sizes that I applied. So all those, other than the, so if there's an offset X and a box collider size change on the X and Y, you're going to want to nuke those. So you just hit this and then hit remove property. So the only thing in here right now for this is going to be the offset Y, which is 0.155. And then for the climb shoot, same thing, it's just going to be 0.155. No size changes and no X offset change. For the climb throw, it's the same thing as the shoot, 0.155, and no size changes on the box collider. And climb top, same thing, 0.155, and no box collider size changes. The hit, if there were any box collider changes in here, remove them. So then we're going to go back where we did idle. So the jump is a little different though. The size Y we're going to change to 0.23, and then there's only going to be an offset Y, which is the 0.155. So it looks like this. And the next one is going to be the jump shoot, which this possibly is different. I believe I changed the position of the shoot, bullet shoot position on this. So the offset Y is going to be the 0.155. The box size Y is going to be like the previous one, which is 0.23. And then his bullet shoot position X is going to be 0.145. And the Y position of the bullet chute is going to be 0.2, and obviously no Z. So it's going to be like right there, pretty much at the end of his cannon there. The throw is very similar, I believe, except for the bullet chute position is a little bit different. But it's still going to be the same offset Y and the same size Y on the box collider. And then the X is going to be 0.12 on the bullet chute. The Y is going to be 0.195. So it's kind of like right there in the middle of his hand, sort of. And then the run is going to be, if there were any box colliders in here, we're going to get rid of them because we're going to keep the same one that's default. And it's going to stay the same throughout the animation. So it's not going to move. It looks like he's moving because that's how his animation is, but the box collider is going to remain the same. So nothing there. And then the run shoot should be similar, except however I believe I modify the bullet shoot position, because before it would go up, it would follow the cannon. The cannon's a little bit up, it's a little bit down. So if you actually preview it, if I go to the next one, it would move up along with that. If you actually play the game, it always remains constant at one level. So we're going to have that at 0.12 on the Y, and then it's going to be a constant X, which is going to be the 0.195, which is right here at the end. So if we play it, and our box collider doesn't move either. So the bullet chute position is always going to stay in the same spot. So it's always going to, the bullets are always going to be leaving at the same height. They're not going to change. So enemies like Kamadoma, Screwdriver, the bullets will, well, Kamadoma will hit, but Screwdriver, the bullet should go right over it if it's all the way down to the ground and not doing anything. So no box collider changes on this, so if you have them, remove them. And then these are the bullet chute position values. The next one is going to be the plain old chute, which is going to be no box colliders on this, so it's going to be the default, remove them if you have them. And then the X chute position is going to be 0.19, and then the Y is going to be 0.12, so it's like a little bit underneath. So if you actually play it, it does shoot a little bit below the cannon when it comes out, when he's just standing there, and when he's running too. Then the next one is going to be the teleport, which I believe I edited this last frame. I had that little step-looking image, so I replaced that with, I think it's idle 2, the idle 2 image. So it's basically, you could just use the idle image and just drop that in there. So when he lands, it'll just land and just, he's not going to actually move his foot at all, because that's actually going to, that frame is going to be used for the step forward when he starts running, which is going to be a little bit later in this video. That's been requested by some people. So offset, let's see here. So I don't know, I don't think any of this has changed for the, except I don't believe any of these values have changed, but the very first frame, the box collider is basically down there. These are the values: 0 for the X offset, 0.015 for the Y offset. The box collider is going to be 0.01 and put on the X and the Y. And it's going to basically stay that way all the way up until the last frame. And technically, actually, now that I see this, this is actually, this is wrong. So, though that should, hold on a minute. Yeah, those actually should be the new values. So I missed this animation. Anyway, fixed now. So just change this last one here so it matches the original, because if you don't do it, this isn't going to, when it plays through, it's not going to adjust itself. Even though, honestly, this animation plays through, your scene starts, he's going to switch to his idle anyway, so, I mean, it really doesn't matter, I guess, if you do change this or not, because he's just going to go straight to his idle after teleport. But if you want it to be more accurate, then you're going to want to change it. Anyway, offset X 0, offset Y 0.105, size X 0.11, size Y 0.19. So now on the last frame, he's basically got his new box collider size that we started at the beginning of this. And so that's the teleport. So if we play it, basically there's this teleport. And then the throw, which I don't believe, box collider is going to be the default, so if there are any in there on yours, remove them. Your bullet shoot position, which is basically the throw position, hasn't changed, so it should still be 0.09 and 0.15 on the Y, and the X is 0.09. So those are the animation changes for him. There's going to be like I said, when we get to the stepping one, we're going to add a new one into this, but these are the changes for what we have so far. The other thing is going to be if you didn't watch the tile map or the ladder video, I changed the raycast distance here on the player fixed update from 0.05 to 0.25. So his box cast isn't so far down, it's a little bit up. And then the other change is actually going to be in the ladder climbing, which I had forgotten to add. And I believe it is here. So on the move on the ladder when we're not shooting or throwing. Well, I say throwing, but I totally forgot to add in, and it not is throwing. So we're going to put that in there, and for this segment, that's all the changes that there are for our player. So we're going to move on to the next one. So the next one has to do with a jump flicker animation, and I don't know if you've noticed it. Kind of runs fast, so you might not catch it. But actually, if you jump, you can see there was a flicker where it shows he's in the air, but then he's grounded again, like showing his idle, and then he goes back up in the air. So let me do it one more time. You can see his arms flicker up, so he switches to the jump animation, then he switches back, and then he switches again. So, see that? So we're going to see if we can fix that. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually, this is in the player controller, by the way. This is kind of like redundant code because he's grounded and we're playing this. When he's not grounded, it's down here. So this is actually kind of like really there's no point to this, honestly. So I'm going to try getting rid of this first. So let's see what happens when we do that. And actually I should have left that in there so we can see how it affects the game. So when he jumps, just change our time scale so it goes nice and slow. Start it again. Let's see what the jump looks like now. Alright, so far no flicker, but you probably noticed something else. So let's try it again. It doesn't flicker, but he stays idle when he gets up a couple of movements. And so now we're going to remedy that. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to end up using a coroutine that's going to be used in conjunction with our ground check. So I'm going to have this bool that we're adding in here called jump started. And so what this is going to do is it's going to stay, it's kind of like what I was doing with the ladder climbing, so that you basically are ignoring the ground check for X amount of time. So it gives your momentum a chance, or your box glider a chance to get away from the ground. So this is what this variable is going to do. We're going to use a coroutine to basically use some timing to give ourselves a chance to get off the ground before we actually start checking for ground again. And so I'm going to come down here into my fixed update, and I'm going to add it into here for my check of my box cast to see if I'm colliding off the ground. So we're going to add that there. And then back down here in my jumping, where I have the key jump and its grounded check, where I ended up actually nuking this out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this whole chunk here, and I'm going to replace it with this function called jump that we're going to define. And after the flip function down here, we're going to put on our jump, and we're also going to have the coroutine for the jump. So inside this jump, we're going to say if we're pressing the jump key and we're grounded, but we haven't started our jump yet. So then what we're going to do is we're going to do the same thing we were doing above. We're going to apply our jump velocity, and then what we're going to do is we're going to start that coroutine. So this coroutine down here is going to set jump started equal to true. It's going to wait for a fixed update frame time, and then it's going to set jump started to false. So it's going to give a chance for that box glider to get off the ground and the box cast to get away from the ground, and that should prevent the flicker. So we're going to try that out. Okay, so let's start it up here. I put in the timescale thing, so we're going to hit it. So it looks like he goes straight into his jump, and there is no flicker. So let's try that again. I'm just going to move down, boom, jump. So he doesn't stay idle and move off the ground when he's idle. So it looks like it's doing what we need it to do. So I'm going to take out the timescale now. Alright, no timescales, hit the jump. Doesn't look like he's flickering. So I can see that he's running in real time. Back and forth. Alright, so I believe that will solve our jump flicker issue. So this next one comes by request. So when the, make sure I'm on here. So when the player actually starts his running, he has this little bit of his foot pushing back before he starts to, start doing a cycle. So mine currently just goes straight into the cycle. So we need to add in this little first step. I'm just tapping right now so you can kind of see the foot moving. He just starts, push forward the first step of his run. So we're going to try adding that in. So the first thing I'm going to do is this frame here, or this the little step. I think I originally called it idle 3. Well, I'm going to rename this. I call it run step. So you may want to rename yours, you may not. It's up to you. Next thing we do is what I ended up doing was the run animation, because we're not going to rename this throughout all of our code and everything like that. We're going to rename the original run animation to run loop. So this is actually the loop. And what we're going to do then is we're going to end up creating a brand new animation called run that's just going to have that single frame of the foot of his little initial step. So first thing you're going to do is just rename your run to run loop, and you may have to do it over here too. And then because it's already going to be inside of your animator, so you're going to want to rename it there too. So rename the actual file that's here from run to run loop, and then change its name inside of the animator. And then what you're going to do is create a new animation. Just create a new animation, right click, create animation, and just call that one player run. And it's going to basically have the same sample rate, so just do 10 or whatever you have. So it's going to be 10, and there's not going to be any loop time on this, where on the original, which is now called run loop, there is a loop time. So we're going to have a run and a run loop. So it's going to basically, the idea behind this is it's going to play the run and it's going to transition into the loop. So to do that, we're going to, you're going to link, you're going to bring in the run animation. So after you do that, double click on, after you've created it, you drop in that single frame in there. You're going to double click on your animator, then you would right click, create from empty, or from selected clip, and you're going to have your run. So you should have both your run and your run loop in here. And then what you're going to do is you're going to right click on your run, and you're going to make a transition to your loop. So you're going to have this little transition here. So when you have your transition, you're going to have these settings. So you're going to want it to look like this. So there's not going to be any transition in between here other than going from this to this. So no blending, anything like that. So you're going to have has exit time. Your exit time is going to be 1. It's going to be a fixed duration, and then I think by default it says like 0.25. You're going to just change it to 0. So it's just going to go from run into run loop. Okay. So once you have that and you're holding down that key, it should just go from here and then just stay into this. But it's not going to at first, so we're going to see why. Okay, so I have this running right now, and I have my run and everything. Right now I'm on idle. I'm going to hold down my right key, and you're going to see down here it starts on the run, and it goes to the run loop, but it keeps going back to run 1. So you can see it just kind of like flickers between both of those animations. And the reason it's doing that is just because of how I originally wrote the code. If you notice in the code, I'm repeatedly calling the same animation over and over and over throughout an update. Depending on, the right keys pressed, then it would, do like player run, and etc. So normally, if you don't have any transitions or like that, it would just, it would know where it's leaving off and would just keep, where it's left. But in this case, it doesn't know where it left off because it wants to go from this to this. So we keep calling run repeatedly. It's going to keep basically annihilating our run loop. So we need to solve that next. So throughout our code, I keep calling animator.play and then the animation name. So we're going to create a special play animation function. And what we're going to first do is we're going to find a new string variable called last animation name. And the idea behind this is we're going to play our animation, our function called play animation. And what it's going to do is it's going to see what the value of the last animation name was. And if it happens to be different, it's going to play the new animation. And so it's going to stay on that same animation until we change the name, or therefore changing what animation we're going to be playing. So first we're going to do, you're going to see it in action. So what we're going to do is we're going to define this string here called last animation name. And so down here after that jump coroutine we created, we're going to create it here. It's going to be called play animation. It's going to be taking a string of the animation name that we want to play. And these parameters are basically the same as if you look up the actual animator.play function. We're going to take these into account in case we ever want to just follow the same method parameters and everything like that from ours, so we can pass it on to the actual animator.play. So what we're going to do here is we're going to take this animation name that we're passing in. We're going to see if that name is different from the last animation name. And if it is different, then we're going to save that name and we're going to start playing that new animation. And if we happen to pass that same name again, because as our update loop's constantly calling, it's going to be calling animator.play, but it's going to be replaced by play animation. So it's going to see, oh well, those names are the same, and it's not going to execute this code. So it's only going to play that one animation once until it changes. So that's how we're going to solve our loop problem of constantly calling the run, where we're technically really only going to be calling it once until we call something different. And so then what you're going to do is all of your animator.plays in your player controller, you're going to want to replace them with that play animation. So you can basically use a string replace and just search out animator.play and just replace it with play animation. So you're going to do that for every one of them that you have inside of your player controller. Alright, so I ran through the file. I've changed all of the animator.plays to play animation, and I just stopped here because I want to show you the stop damage animation because we pass on the layer and the normalized time. So that's why we have those parameters for our version. So we can pass those to our function so they can pass it on to the same animator.play. So everything basically works the same, and we're just replacing all the function names. So with that done, let's go and try it out now. Let's see, hopefully I don't have to reload this thing. I think it should be able to just take it. And I'm going to start this up. And I'm just going to, okay, so it runs. And you can see it kind of does that foot forward thing, but you can kind of see he's like really moving forward a lot. But he's doing the footstep, and then he goes into his run. And then you can jump and slide into the run, or the first step. So that's basically the majority of it. Now there's one more thing we're going to do to kind of make this more in line with how like the original Mega Man run works. So inside of our code over here in the player controller, over at where we have the player direction input, right now I'm using GetAxis raw for the horizontal and the vertical. Now there's another version called just GetAxis, and the difference between those is with GetAxis raw, which we've been using, it's either going to go straight to a 1 for positive or a -1. So if you go left, it's going to go straight to -1. If you go right, it's going to go straight to +1. Well, the version of just plain GetAxis actually has a stepping mechanism. So basically steps in that direction. So it doesn't just go like a hard to the end. It progressively moves towards that over 0.05 steps. You can read all about it. Go look up Input.GetAxis on Unity's documentation site. You can read all about it. So basically, to solve that problem and to be more in line with how Mega Man kind of works, because when you press the key, you kind of see he moves, and then even if you let go of the arrow or the keypad, he kind of keeps moving until he slowly stops. So he's kind of got a little bit of a slide thing going on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change my horizontal. I'm going to leave my vertical the way it is. I want my vertical when I'm on the ladder to be straight. It's going to be either go straight to a 1 either direction. But for my horizontal, I want to progressively get to that 1 the longer I hold the key, and when I let go, it'll basically slowly decrease. So now I'm going to come back over here and we're going to try that again. So with this done, I'm going to see there's something still going on here. Oh, there's one more change I need to do, actually. I forgot. Anyway, so if I tap it, he kind of just moves. See that? It's moving in the right direction, but there was one more thing I need to do. Hold on one second. So the problem actually has to do with this velocity. So right now I'm going hard on the speed. So you can see I'm just going boom, negative speed right away. If I come here, if I'm pressing the right arrow or the boom, positive speed, or I'm doing down here where there's no speed and he's just not going to move at all. So the way I'm going to fix this is, after all of this, all I'm going to say is I'm going to take the speed, which we have as one of our serialized fields. So it's going to take his speed and it's going to times it by key horizontal. Now, key horizontal, as I said, is going to basically be incrementing the longer I hold it until it reaches 1. So the longer I hold it, the closer it is, and then it'll get to 1. And if I let go of the key, it'll slowly decrease. And so this is going to basically be times our speed. And so he's going to slowly start moving and slowly slow down. So we're going to put that there outside of these ifs. So we're going to get rid of that. We're going to get rid of this one. And then we're going to get rid of this one. So we're going to get rid of the left, the right, and the no movement. Because if the key horizontal is actually 0 times the speed, it's going to end up being 0 anyway. So we're just going to move all that velocity into just one velocity line down here outside of all these ifs. So now I'm going to come over here and just stop it, start it again. And I'm going to hold down my key. And you can see I'm going to hold it down. You can see he slowly starts moving until he starts moving full speed. And I let go of the key and he slowly stops. So you can see that little foot action right there, just kind of like the original. I just tap in the key really fast and then I'm going to hold it. And you can see he slows down into stopping. So that hopefully answers the one question that people have been asking about. I know that there's a jump involved and jump landing onto that step, which you can kind of see he does that a little bit. I know it's probably not perfect. It's probably not 100% identical to the original game, but I think it's close enough to what we want to achieve with this. And of course, by all means, feel free to take it even further if you want to. But I believe that resolves this issue. The next item on the agenda is the bullet image. So normally his bullet is oval shaped. When I originally started working on this, I ended up creating just a circle just as kind of like a placeholder, and I didn't have the emulator at the time, so I couldn't find the graphic anywhere online. So we're going to replace that now and clean up the prefab for the bullet. So this is currently the bullet, but we're going to replace this. So the asset I'm going to be using is actually took a screenshot and I cut out the bullet, cleaned up the edges so it's all transparent on the corners and everything like that. And we're going to take that bullet and I'm going to replace it in my graphics folder of my project. And now I have an oval shaped bullet. But there are other things that need to be handled. So what you'll do is you're going to go into the prefab of the bullet, which should be under your prefabs, weapons, and then bullets. So you can basically just open that up. First thing I'm going to do is you can see the circle collider. The radius is a little bit too big. So I'm going to actually knock that down to the 0.025, so that's the right size that we're going to use. And the other thing is the scale. Now, later in the video, I kind of backed myself into a corner when I started working on this. I did everything in 16:9, everything was widescreen. I put everything at 1.5 scale, and that basically totally annihilated the whole tile map, size and all that stuff for trying to make the original, because the original is not widescreen. It's actually 256 by 240 resolution. So I kind of shot myself in the foot when I started doing this, but I have a workaround solution for the most part. Maybe not the most ideal, but it will get the job done for what I need to do just to complete this project. And so, but back to this, the bullet, we're going to change its scale to 1.5 and 1.5 because all of our original prefabs I'm going to have as 1.5. And then what we're going to do is we're going to create prefab variants, and those are all going to be the size down for the 4:3 resolution. And these will all be, the originals will all be for 16:9 because I don't want to have to redo all these. I'd rather just make copies and make modifications on the copies. So this is our bullet. The other thing I believe I need to do though is on the bullet script here, the size on this scale here, because I was using the scale here to kind of warp that bullet into an oval shape. Well, we don't need to do that anymore, so we're going to change the scale to 1.5 and 1.5. And I believe that the radius, the radius needs to be changed as well so it matches. So technically all of these things are kind of like moot now, because I had all these modifications in the bullet script to have altering radiuses and alternate scales and everything like that. But technically, you can still use it if you're going to use it for a different game. But it's kind of purpose doesn't really make sense anymore for this. So those are the changes that we're going to do for the bullet and the bullet graphics. So now we should have basically an oval-shaped bullet. So I'm going to try this out. Okay, so we're going to shoot. And as you can see, I have a nice oval looking bullet, and if I check on that bullet, you can see that the circle radius is right there where it should be, and it's over there too. So that's resolving the look of our bullet and the size of our bullet, the shape and the collider and all that. So we're going to be moving on. Up next has to do with the WeaponsStruct. I'm going to change that. I'm going to actually add to it. When I started the series, I had created serialized for the bullet damage and the bullet speed, and we were using that separately. And then later came the WeaponsStruct when the weapon switching and the weapons menu type stuff started showing up. So I had still been using the old way of just using these serialized values here, but we're going to tie using the WeaponsStruct into when we're using the Mega Buster and the Hyper Bomb and those other weapons. So we're going to make changes to that structure and add the code in to use those values from the structure. So the first thing I'm going to do here is inside of the player controller and the WeaponsStruct here, we're adding a new public vector 2. I'm going to call it weapon velocity. And then what we're also going to do is we don't need the bullet damage and the bullet speed anymore. So those are actually going to go away. So I'm going to just nuke those. We don't need them anymore. And then we're going to basically add in the values for this, for the velocities into the prefab. Actually, before it would let me do that, it would compile. So I put those back in there, those serialized. I'll delete them last. So back in the player prefab, we're going to add in our values that we were using before. So for the velocity of the bomb. So on the hyper bomb, we have weapon velocity now. inside our code, we're using x value of 2 and a y value 1.5. So we're going to put that on our hyperbomb entry here in our weapons data struct that's tied to our player prefab. So we're going to do that. The rest of these are basically all zeros, except for the Mega Buster, which is right here, because that one we have the serialized down here for the bullet speed. So that's actually going to be a 5 there and nothing on the Y, because it only travels horizontal, as we know. So with that in there, then we can go and get rid of those values inside of our script here. So now I'm going to nuke them. I'm going to save it. But there's one more thing we have to do, and that's actually to be able to use those velocities and those other values in our shoot bullet and our throw bomb. So this is what shoot bullet currently looks at. It looks at that bullet prefab that we have, and then the actually I think that might be something we have to get rid of too. But and then the bullet shoot position and then the speed and the damage. So we're going to modify it to use the WeaponsStruct values. So this is the modified version. So what we end up doing is we use the Mega Buster entry on the weapons data struct, and that's where we're going to get the prefab from. The bullet name, we're going to pull it from the prefab that we get off of that same weapons data structure. Same bullet, shoot position, that's nothing different. And then we're going to get the damage and the velocity X from the weapons data structure and set up our damage value on our bullet speed. So that basically takes care of shoot bullet. Now throw bomb, this is the original throw bomb, and I'm going to show you what the changes for that will look like. Well, the only thing I changed here is actually the velocity, which we're going to pull out of the weapon velocity for from the weapons data structure, and then we're going to pass that into our bomb script. So that's really the only change to throw bomb. Most of it was already set up because we were building it after the structure, but the shoot bullet came way before that. So those are the changes for those two functions. And the other thing would be to get rid of that prefab, which would be right here, and we don't need this anymore because we're actually using the WeaponsStruct, so we can actually get rid of that and save that. So that would be all the changes that we need for using the weapon data structure for our shooting the bullet and for the velocity and the damage and all that. So we'll be moving on now. Actually, I take that back. There is actually one more. I just realized it after. The weapon structure actually has the audio clip too. So we're going to change this line here where it was basically shoot bullet sound clip that's separate as a serialized, and we're going to use it off the weapons data structure. So you're going to basically change this line in shoot bullet to use the weapon clip for the Mega Buster. And then the other part would be to get rid of this shoot bullet clip, because now this is no point for this because we're pulling it from up here, the audio clip off the weapon structure. So let's get rid of this. Now I believe that should take care of all those changes. This next change actually has been lingering around since way in the early beginning. The big explosion that the player uses, well, the bosses for the most part use it too, like BombMan, etc. So what I originally called it was the player defeat effect. Well, we're going to actually end up renaming that. I mean, it doesn't have anything to do with any code change or anything like that. It still works the same. It's just I don't like the name of it. It doesn't really fit anymore. So I'm going to rename this thing to Explode Effect 3. So in the scripts folder, we're going to look for player defeat effect, and then we're going to call it Explode Effect 3. And then after that, we're going to open it up, and we have to change the class name too. So that's going to be Explode Effect 3. So we're going to save that. Give it a sec. We're going to go back over to Unity. And it's changed there, it's changed there, and then what we're going to do is we're going to go look in our effects prefab for 3, and if we click on it and highlight, you can actually open the prefab too, but you can see now that the script has been renamed here to Explode Effect 3. And if we want to try this out real quick just to make sure that there are no hiccups or anything like that, I'm just going to go to game window here. Just put it on this for right now. And let's just play it. And I'm just going to press the E key to explode, and it still works. So that is basically the resolution of that one. The next revision actually has to do with the weapons menu. And I believe it came up as a bug when I was doing the video for it. Basically, when you want to activate the weapons menu, there should be no player weapons currently in the screen. Because I think when I was doing it, I had the magnet beam showing, I switched the weapons menu, and some snafu happened, and it just didn't work right. I mean, I think it got locked on the screen. I don't remember exactly what happened. But when there are weapons on the screen, the weapons menu should not activate. So for instance, if I'm just going to come over here, I'm going to do some shooting, I'm going to pause, and if I press start, which should take me to the weapons menu, it actually kicks out of the pause. So if I pause, unpause, or hit start, no weapons menu. And if I shoot and press start, the weapons menu didn't pop up until all those bullets were off of the screen. So I'm going to do it again. Shoot, start, nothing, and then boom, there it is. So we have two cases. So if there are bullets or weapons of the player on the screen, then if I hit start, it kicks you out of pause, and then you can hit start again, and then it'll go to weapons menu. Or if you are not paused and you have bullets or weapons on the screen from the player and hit start, nothing will happen until they are gone. So we're going to resolve that issue now. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go back over to our shoot bullet. Much like throw bomb here, I need to somehow know a bullet belongs to the player. So what I ended up doing with like the hyper bomb, because BombMan throws bombs and I can throw bombs after I capture his ability, I was putting the name of the game object as part of the name of the weapon. So like for instance, this was like bomb, and then it said like player in parentheses, or it said BombMan in parentheses. So I need to do the same thing with my bullet, because there are enemies that shoot bullets and it's still the same name bullet. So like Mambu's bullet, Screwdriver's bullet, etc. So I am basically going to take this here, and whenever I shoot a bullet, it's going to say bullet, parenthesis, player, end parenthesis. So that is the first change. The next change is going to actually happen over in the Game Manager. So down here towards the bottom, before where I have the destroy stray bullets function inside the Game Manager, I'm creating a new function here that's a bool, returns bool. It's called rPlayerWeaponsInScene. And what it's going to basically do is it's going to search the scene. I know this is the most inefficient way of doing it. You should probably throw all the weapons for the player in a list and then check the list, but whatever. It's already this far in. Some more inefficiency isn't going to kill us. So what we're going to do is we're going to search, and besides, it could be like one bullet on the screen. I mean, it's really not going to hurt anything, or no bullets at all. It's just 3 calls to the GameObject.find. Anyway, so what we're going to do is we're going to use GameObject.find. We're going to look for bullets that are from the player, bombs that are from the player, and any platform beams. Now, obviously, there's no player here because Mega Man's the only one that creates the platform beam. But we're going to be looking for these 3 things that he can generate, and if we ever create additional weapons, we'd want to add them into this. So that's where the list might be more efficient. So you can just, every time you create one of these things, you add it to the list. Check the size of the list, and then go based off of that. So we're going to check these, and if none of these are, if any of them are null or not null, basically, then it's obviously going to return true. But if all of them are null, then it's going to return false. So that would basically mean there are no, items in the scene from the player. So now that we have this function, now we have to use it with our weapons menu. So up here inside of our show weapons menu function, after our pause check here, this is the part that we've added in. So what we're going to do is we're going to see, are there any player weapons in the scene? If there are player weapons in the scene, and if the game happens to be paused, we're going to unpause it. So we're going to unpause the game. Otherwise, if it's not paused, it's just not going to do anything for the weapons menu. So if there are any bullets, it should, and you have it paused, it'll just kick you out of pause, etc. So with that, we're going to give that a whirl and see what happens. So I'm going to come over here. And we know our pause key is tied to P and the weapons menu is tied to enter. So let's just start it up here. So I'm going to shoot, I'm going to hit P for pause, and I'm going to hit enter, and it unpaused. So I'm going to hit P to pause, enter, and it just unpauses. And if I hit enter again, it goes into the weapons menu. So I'm going to shoot, but not hit pause, and nothing until the bullets are gone and out of the scene. So that's when the weapons menu popped up. So I'm going to do it again. There's a bunch of bullets in the scene, enter, 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 and now they're gone. And now it'll pop up. So that should take care of that issue. And now we can move on. So the next issue has to do with the camera transition and moving through the transition when you have an animation. So normally when you're playing the game, if you go through a transition and he happens to be, say, running, right? He plays that run through the transition. And then, there's the pauses and everything like that for the camera to move around all that. But the animation in this case doesn't work. Now there's somewhere along the line, I don't remember where I did it, but I ended up setting all the keys like the horizontal input, the vertical, the jump, and the spacebar for the C key for the shooting. I ended up negating all those so that there was no movement, and that's basically what kind of kills it. So like for instance, just to show you what I'm talking about. So normally if I run through here, I should be running and then going into that. But you saw I switched to his idle animation and he just kind of slid through. But that's not the way it's supposed to work. So we're going to fix that now. So the first thing we're going to do is inside of the player controller and freeze input. What we're going to do is right now we freeze, and when we freeze, that's when I basically zeroed out the horizontal, the vertical, and the jump and the shoot defaults. So what I'm going to do here is I'm only going to freeze, but if there is this part, it's still going to freeze because of this bool here. This is our freeze input, but we're only going to zero these out if there is no camera transition happening. So that way, if I happen to be holding the right down when I go into a camera transition or the left, it's going to keep that key pressed down, or keep that key press, and they should play that animation through that transition. So I'm going to have to stop this because it's not going to, pretty sure, yeah, null. So 1 minute. Okay, we're back to where we were. So I'm going to go through, and as you can see, he's still stuck on his idle. Well, that actually has to do with the camera transition script. So in that script, you can see here, this is basically once we first enter into the transition. We have an order of operations problem here. So what we end up doing is we freeze the input and freeze the player. Well, freezing the input is going to be looking to see if a transition has happened. Well, it's going to see it hasn't because this ends up getting done after the fact. So this actually needs to kind of be switched around. So we're going to fix that first. So what I ended up doing was I took the player code and put it after the game manager stuff. So we're going to say that we're in a transition first, and then when we freeze the input, we're going to see, oh, okay, well, it's true, we're in a transition, and so therefore it's going to basically keep the values of those keys or whatever's being pressed. So then we're going to go and try that one more time and see what happens. So let's just load, okay. All right, we're back to where we were, and now let's try it this time. So I'm going to hold down the left. And now, as you can see, he was running through the transition. So he kept his animation, and obviously he didn't detect ground, so then he switched to his jump. So I'm going to go through it one more time. And we're going to go through there, and boom, he runs through. So then we're going to go and see what happens when we try to do it while we're on a ladder. Okay, so we're back on the tile map, and we're at our first ladder transition for vertical movement. We know the horizontal works. Now let's check out the vertical. So I'm going to go up this ladder here. And that's something weird. Hold on a sec. Now let me check that out. I don't remember that happening before. Maybe something has changed. Hold on. Okay, so the problem actually had to do with his box size. He still had the widescreen size in here, so it was actually 0.17 on the X, so he's kind of fat, so he wasn't fitting through. Also on the sprite height, it had the widescreen or the 16:9 size, which was 0.36, and then the climb speed 0.525. So for this scene, I've changed them, but that's why we're going to have a prefab variant version of this guy that's going to be for the tile map or the 4:3 resolution, and then we have the other one that'll be for the 16:9 resolution. So anyway, I changed it in here, so we have all the values on this version of him. So it should work now, so I'm going to go skip ahead, get back over to that part. But before I do, actually I want to show you this. So before we had that, I mean, it's like 98% better than it was, so there's still like certain cases when you get like right on the corner, they'll do weird things. But that whole, when you're sliding up along there, that whole jitter thing, that's pretty much been resolved with a more narrow box collider size. So that has been taken care of with the changing of the box collider size. Okay, so let me get back over to this so we can see what's going on here. And and then we want to transition 1, which is right there. Can't see it. There. So there's transition 1, and now we're going to try climbing up. So let's see what happens. So I'm going to hit the transition. I let go of the keyboard. You say he skipped back down and started moving again. So he does he still animates and everything, but there's a problem with that. And that actually has to do with this part here, with the animation and then the key vertical. Now, the whole freeze player or freeze input thing, well, actually, it's freeze player. I don't know exactly which one. But anyway, problem with this is that takes into account that he is using his velocity and his rigid body. Now, because we're on the ladder, I chose to go, instead of using the whole gravity scale approach, I switch him to kinematic. So what we're doing here is, because we are moving his transform position, we're also giving him a velocity. So it's kind of like he's double moving. So he's moving when he shouldn't be moving, and he's moving farther than he should. So we're going to remedy that with some code. Okay, so what I've done here is this animation speed thing, I wrapped this in checking if there's a camera transition or not. And then we've also put it in here that we're going to check and see if we're moving on the ladder. So if we're not in a camera transition, then we want to basically be able to move him. Because otherwise our transition is going to be moving him. So the transition moves him, and then this is moving him, so that's why they're fighting each other. So now we're going to come back over to this. I'm going to have to restart it. Okay, we're back at the ladder, so now I'm going to try moving up it. I hit the transition, he stopped that time, and then he moved through the transition with his animation. So then I'm going to go back down, and then he animates down. So in the final, this is obviously going to have to move after he gets when he gets above it, and then when he gets below it, and things like that. But that's basically solves that issue right there. So now he animates upright and vertically, and his horizontal should work fine. Should work the same. All right. So the other thing we're going to add to it is when we're moving through a transition, I'm going to keep it so that I remember if I am invincible or not. And the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remember my previous velocity. So like when I'm falling, and if I hit that transition, he actually loses momentum. So you can see when he hits it, and then you can see he kind of slowly picks up speed to fall, hit another transition, like when he's going down to face BombMan, and then he'll slow again. So I'm going to take care of that, and I'm actually going to jump ahead so you can see what that looks like. Before we do that, I want to see if this works. So now with my box collider size changed and everything, Before I had a problem fitting through here, and especially getting into here. So I'm going to see, and now it works the way it should. So I was able to get in there, and then I can jump through here, no problem. Okay, so now here is, we're going to double check, make sure we have a horizontal transition in this version and the tile map version. So I'm just going to run through it instead of jumping through it. And I play my horizontal run through. And so that's good. So this is where the vertical momentum gets lost. So if I fall here, he slowly kind of picks up speed again. He slowly kind of picks up speed again. And then he'll get stuck. So we're going to solve that. Let me see. So the first thing, because I want to retain my invincibility, is I'm going to add another public bool function here like I have with my isGrounded. Now I'm going to have one that says isInvincible. I'm just going to pass back the value of my invincibility, whether I'm invincible or not. So that's all done in the player controller. Next addition will be inside of the camera transition script. So I'm going to add in a vector2 called player velocity and a bool here called player invincibility. So these are basically going to retain the values when we get to the transition and restore them when we're through the transition. So down here when we enter the transition, we're going to add in here where we're going to save the velocity, and then we're going to see what our invincibility status is. And then we're going to save that, and then regardless of whatever that is, we're going to set ourselves to invincible. And the reason I do this is because even though our game, if you play the original, I don't think there are any enemies that are really around any transition areas for the player or Mega Man. But in our case, when I get to a transition, and if, say, I wanted to have an enemy there, and it happens to be like Sniper Joe, for instance, that he jumps and he follows me, or he jumps up and I'm like above him and I transition down into him, I want to make sure that I'm invincible when I'm going through the transition, so it doesn't switch to like the hit animation during the transition. So I'm setting myself to invincible through the transition. So this is when we enter it, and then if we exit it at the very end here, so then what we're going to do is we're going to take our velocity and restore it, and then we're going to take our invincibility and restore it, whatever it was set to. So that should take care of that. So we're going to jump ahead over here back to the end and see if it looks any different. Okay, back to the doorway. Now let's see if this is any different velocity-wise. Seems like he's faster after the pause. Still, that's whatever on that. Okay, so I believe that resolves the camera transition issue with the animations. So issue number 10 is actually the bonus items. When I originally created them, they are not triggers, and I was using on collision enter to know if I captured them or not. So somebody brought up a while ago that if you happen to be below one and you say jump into it, kind of like stop where it is, it disappears and you kind of like lose your momentum. So let's take a look at that real quick. So I added a Yoshichi here, and I'm going to have it frozen on the Y constraint, and I'm just going to jump into it. Now I should be able to jump higher than this. As you can see, like about halfway into it. But if I jump and capture it, you can see I basically stopped right where it was and got, pushed back down. So that shouldn't happen. You should be able to pass through it, capture it, and keep your momentum. So the problem is because, like I said, they're solid. They're solid to Mega Man. So what I'm going to do is I didn't want to have to add a bunch of triggers to all of them, but to solve it, that's what I'm going to end up doing. So to solve this problem, here's the Yoshichi, right? So what you're going to do is you're going to add a child game object here, and in this case, I just call it trigger. So the parent, which is the main item, is on the layer of item. And so what I'm going to do here is you add the trigger, which happens to have the same dimensions, but you're going to make it a trigger. And that's not tagged, and it's on the default layer. So what will happen is when Mega Man's going to be we're going to change the layer collision matrix so that he can pass through the items. And then what we're going to do is we're going to change it to on trigger, and so that he can capture it through the trigger instead of on collision enter. So first part, create the child, add a box collider, same size as the parent, so you can see it's 0.14 and 0.14, 0.14, and you're just going to make it a trigger. And the second part is you're going to go into the project settings, you're going to go to physics 2D, and you're going to look for your player here, and your player should basically pass through items. So that's the second part. Third part would be you're going to have to edit the item script. So this is how it is currently. It's on collision enter. So what we need to do is all this code that's inside of on collision enter, we're going to put it on trigger enter. So we're going to add a void on trigger enter 2D. We can just get rid of that. And we're going to use the same, we're going to call it other. And all this code that we have in here, we're going to cut it and drop it in there and get rid of this on collision enter. So let's just get rid of that. Drop that in there. This is now pointless. And we can save this. So now what we're going to do is over in the scene, we're probably going to have to get rid of this or double check it. Maybe it retained the new settings. It looks like it did. So it's got the trigger and it's on the item. So let's see what happens now when we run it. So play this. Now what should happen is I shouldn't get stopped when I touch it. I should be able to pass through it while capturing it. So I'm going to go over here, I'm going to jump, and you can see I didn't get slowed down. So let's just move it down a little bit, just so we can really see it for sure. Run it again. So I should be able to fly through it if I'm actually to the side of it. You can see I well go over it, at least a heads amount. And then we're going to jump through it. And I didn't lose any momentum when going through it. And when he was running in horizontal, you could kind of see him pause a little bit when he touched them. So that's why I didn't feel it was a big deal. But there are cases where they might be on the edge of a side of a ledge, right on the corner where you can top up and catch it. But you want to be able to get it, and you don't want them to be able to slow you down. So that should resolve that issue. Oh, and by the way, you're going to want to change all your other prefabs too. So actually, let me do that real quick and show you each of them. So basically, you're going to edit every one of your bonus items. So you're going to add on that trigger. Same thing that you did with the Yoshichi. So they're all going to be the same. So just make sure that your trigger and everything for the box flyer is the same. The trigger version is the same size as your actual solid over here. So the extra life, it has the trigger. The big energy has a trigger. Small energy, trigger, etc., for all of your bonus items. So that would be that's the end of this part. So issue number 11 has to do with the transparency for some of these bonus items. There are some that just use a regular sprite color to set it transparent, and then there are others that happen to use the ColorSwap shader, like the 1-up, and these items here, because they actually, this item, the big power for the weapons, because they actually change their color to match Mega Man's color scheme. So, for instance, so I'm going to hit the weapons menu, I'm going to switch over to this, and you can see that they switched colors. So, because they basically use the shader. Now the problem is that there's that transparency or that sprite, whatever the way it's written, that doesn't exist. So it causes this error. So as you can see, it's still the other ones don't disappear. So all the items on the screen should disappear when the weapons menu comes up. So now we're going to resolve that. So this is our current item script. So right now there's only one variable here that has to do with the color, and it's a float. Well, this needs to be changed, so we're gonna change this up a little bit. So what I did here is I have a float called item alpha, and then I have a color called item color, and that's going to tie into this bit down here in the hide item. So this needs to be revised. So what I did here was I'm going to look and see. So if it's an item that has the ColorSwap shader, it should have the ColorSwap script on it. So we're going to see if that ColorSwap handle to the script is null or not. If it's not null, that basically means that we're going to be changing the transparency value on that. But otherwise, we're just going to be manipulating the alpha through the sprite. So all we're going to do is it's basically if it's this, otherwise do this. So this is basically the new code for that. So we're going to go over here. We're going to check this out. We have to reload the scene real quick. Start it back up. And on my player, just activate Blink Hunter, Firestorm. So I'm going to hit enter. So now you can see there are no more errors that popped up, and now all the items have disappeared from the screen there. And then I hit enter, and now they come back. So with the color that they're supposed to be. So that's back to the way it's supposed to work. So no more errors, and now it knows which one to use, whether it's the sprite or whether it's the shader. So that one is taken care of. And if you've noticed this also, normally this pause behind shouldn't be there. That's only because it's looking for head canvas without the 43 on it. So I was going to just save that for the end, but I'm just going to get rid of it now so you can just see. I have to restart it because it found it in the beginning. That's not really part of this, but I just wanted to show you if you have that problem, that's why. Since we're there, see, no more paused. Paused is gone, so I'm going to hit P, paused, gone. So anyway, that solves the bonus items problem. The next issue happens to do with the freezing. So when the scene starts, everything should be frozen until Mega Man teleports in, and that's when all the action starts. So, for instance, the enemies will be frozen. However, there are other things that are not, like, although, you're just starting, there are no bullets. These items, if they happen to be in the scene, they don't freeze. So let's just take a look. If I just start this, you're going to see that they fall to the ground. So technically, everything should be frozen when this starts, even though you won't more than likely see any of these things airborne when the scene starts. But this is just something that should be, they should be frozen. So we're going to take care of that now. In one of the other videos, I ended up creating this freeze everything, which is basically has each of the enemies, explosions, items, and weapons, and they each have a freeze as well. And this freeze everything just calls each of those to freeze all of them. So I don't remember what video it is, but if you don't have that, basically it's in the game manager. So starting at the top, there's the freeze enemies, freeze explosions, freeze items, and then the freeze weapons. So all the weapons that happen to be bombs, platform beams, and bullets. And then just everything gets called here, freeze everything. So if we actually go up into the main, it's called MainPlayerLevelLoop. Right now, all there is that we're freezing enemies. And then we unfreeze the enemies and everything. So we're going to change that. So all I did is comment out those freeze enemies, and I just put in freeze everything instead. And then down here I commented out the freeze enemies and added in the freeze everything. So now if we come back over to here, let's just play it and see what happens. So these bonus items should stay still until the scene actually starts. And then they fell. So that should freeze all enemies, all bullets, all bonus items, and all explosions. So, although you won't have any of those things really when the thing starts other than enemies. So now we'll be moving on to the next one. So this next one actually posed quite a, I wouldn't say a challenge, but it was kind of interesting to figure out how I was going to get around it. So when you have stages like, say, Cutman stage, right? I'm just going to start this real quick. You're going to notice that when Mega Man teleports in, he actually passes through a boulder and a platform to land on the second boulder. So technically, these are solid, so he passed right through them to land here. Well, currently, the way I'm doing it is I'm checking to see if I'm grounded when I'm doing the teleport. So if I was to use what I'm doing now and apply it to a level designed like this, I would actually land up here, you know. And then there are other situations like when I'm on the BombMan stage, which I'll go to in a sec. So let's come over here. I'm gonna die, right? So I'm gonna pause it right. Actually, I can't do that. Let's see here. So what I had to do was I had to. Let me get over here. There we go. Because I have they're actually in this level design, there's actually death spikes right here, and if I was to actually start right here, I would basically pass into the death spikes and die right away before I could even start the scene. So I had to basically, at the end of that one video, I just put them here. This is like the checkpoint. It's a part of the checkpoint, so when you actually die here, you start over, and this is a checkpoint. And I had to put him down here underneath those because this is basically going to kill him when he passes through because he has to be above this so he's above the scene because the scene basically, the camera cuts off right there. And this is part when you move up past the transition and then you get into this. So how do you solve something like this? And if I was just to move him, for instance, say if I wanted to start him like right there or something, right? Let's go back over here. And I just exploded and died. So kind of stuck. So now I'm going to have to redo the teleport intro, and that's what this segment's about, and we're going to get on that right now. So currently this is part of the teleport code. So what will happen is he darts down, he's doing the descending, and it's going to check and see if he's grounded, and then it takes that and it's going to change the state to landed. And then it'll come in here to the landed state and then update the animator speed to 1. So, because when he's teleporting down, he's stuck on that blue sliver, like he's speeding like a bullet down. And so it's going to change the animation speed to 1 so he gets past that frame in the animation. And then it's going to come down here into idle. And we say teleport false, which basically means, okay, I'm done teleporting. And then we tell the game manager that we're done teleporting, and then that basically signals, okay, get rid of the ready and let the action start. So my problem is two things. First, it's obviously instant death zones, because we have to pass through instant death zones. So obviously if we're passing through that when the level starts, we don't want to die right away. And then the other part is grounded. So if we want to pass through solids, then we can't be looking at ground. We're going to have to devise a different method of doing our teleport. So what I ended up doing was I ended up creating a new layer called teleport, and that layer is basically collides with absolutely nothing. And because it collides with absolutely nothing, which basically means he'll pass through everything. So how do we stop? So instead of looking to see if we're grounded, we're just going to have to basically tell the game manager or tell the player or the checkpoint or whatever, this is where we want to stop. But in this case, we're going to tell it inside of our teleport code, this is where we want to stop. We want to stop on this Y position. So that's basically what I did to resolve this issue. So now we're going to plug in some code. So the first thing I'm putting in here under my teleport settings in the player controller is I'm saying teleport landing Y, so it's a float. So this is going to be the location that we're going to be looking for when we're teleporting in, and once we hit this Y, that's our signal saying, oh, we should be done teleporting, or that's our fake ground per se, where we're going to be landing at. So we're going to have this float here, and we're going to basically define the value of where we want for whenever. We're going to set this when our player starts, but then the checkpoint's going to have a different one. So then it'll basically override this. So over here, we're going to need to add a new layer, as I was mentioning, because this layer needs to basically be able to pass through everything. So with our player, we're just going to go and hit our layer up here and then choose Add Layer. And in this case, for this project, it'll be layer 14. I'm going to call it teleport. So that's going to be the teleport layer. So I come over here, and if I hit my drop down, so now I have a teleport layer. But obviously, I'm not going to set my player to that. And so what I'm going to do is go over here to my project settings and then back over to physics 2D. This teleport layer, I don't want it to collide with anything. So we're going to get rid of all this. So it's immune to pretty much everything. It's immune to ground, it's immune to players, it's immune to the enemies, items, magnet, all of it. It's immune to itself too. So we're going to get rid of that. So now we have our teleport layer. Then we have to create some code to basically make use of that. So back here in our fixed update, I've added in here too. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at our game object and its layer. Well, our game object in this case, since it's on the player controller, it's going to be our player. Our player is the game object. So we want to see if our layer mask is teleport. If it happens to be teleport, then we're going to be ignoring this whole ground check thing. So who cares about the collider? Cares about the jump. If it happens to be teleport, this is not going to get executed. So our player, if we set the teleport, no ground checking. So that's number one. The next change is down here in our update where we're doing our teleport check. So when we're descending, we're going to be checking our Y position, and we're going to see if it falls below or is equal to that teleport landing Y. Once that occurs, that basically means that's our signal, okay, we should be done teleporting. So this kind of jumps ahead, but what we're going to do is we're going to restore our tag to player, and we're going to restore our layer to player. And then what we're also going to do is we're going to zero out our velocity because we shouldn't be moving anymore. And as I was developing this and toying around with it, regardless of setting my velocity at 0, he still somehow darted through the ground and then bounced back up. So obviously we don't want that to happen because that's just doesn't even look right. It's not even. And so what I ended up doing was to solve that problem. So once I hit my Y position, I freeze all my constraints. So you already know that when you land, you're doing the teleport, you have no control from the input from the player until that whole sequence is done. So freezing the constraints is no problem. So we're going to basically freeze ourselves here after we land. And then what we're going to do is we're going to move our position to make sure that we're right on that Y that we want. We're going to move our player to that position on the Y, and then we're going to change our state to landed. So this is our new section of when we're coming through the teleport and we're descending. The next change is actually in our teleport function. What I ended up doing was we're going to save our constraints. So we're going to take whatever constraints that we currently have, and we're going to save them so that we can restore it. Now technically, I think the only thing you're really freezing is your Z, but we're going to save all, you're going to save whatever the current value is so you can restore it later. So that's the first step. And then this is basically our Y, so we're going to be basically applying our velocity. And then well, that's for current velocity, because you can actually, we use the teleport when we do the what's it called, the weapons menu. So when he switches, he flickers, so we call the teleport. But the thing down here is the descend. This is where we're actually darting through in the intro teleport. So what we're going to do, this is the same. We set the animator speed to 0, but this is new. So what we're going to do is we're going to set our game tag to untagged and our layer to teleport. And then this is our teleport speed, and we're going to set our state to descending. Now you're probably wondering, why are we changing our tag to untagged? Well, that actually has to do with the instant death, because what the instant death is looking for, and the instant death script, is if it's looking for a tag called player, then that's when we're going to basically defeat, and we have that option instead of show explosion. So by untagging ourselves, and being untagged doesn't matter anyway because we're basically teleporting at that moment, and there's really no action in that case. So we basically will bypass, we're going to bypass all the instant deaths. However, bear in mind that we cannot start in the middle of a death, instant death, because on start there's that one, basically that one frame or whatever that basically starts up. If we happen to be in there, then that instant death script is going to see us as tagged as player for that one moment, and then make us explode. So you technically can't be within a death. You can be above it, no problem, and you could be above, like inside of like a wall or whatever, no problem, because we're going to be in the we're going to change our layer and pass through it, but we can't start immediately inside of it, inside of an instant death zone. We can start above it or below it, and we can pass through it after that start. So just keep that in mind. You'll see it in a sec. I might show you in a minute. So then there's that, and then after we're done teleporting everything, we restore the constraints down here. So once we teleport, this is basically the part that we're going to change our layer, change our tag, and do its thing, and pass through. The next thing we're going to add is this set teleport landing function. And this is basically called from, you can call from wherever if you want to update the teleport landing, which is that serialized value up top. But what this is mainly called from is actually our checkpoint, because our checkpoint is going to then, now we're going to move on to modifying the checkpoint. It's going to have a value in there, or a variable for where we want our teleport Y to be. So it's going to call this in our our checkpoint update method for when the scene starts, because obviously the scene starts, we're going to reposition our player to a certain place, but we also want to be able to change the teleport landing Y. That's going to be stored in the checkpoint. So that's the player controller. So now we're going to move on to the checkpoint modification. So the first thing we're going to do inside of our checkpoint script is we're going to add in a new public float called player teleport Y. This is going to be our Y location. Then down here in our checkpoint reach, so once we reach a checkpoint, we need to take the Y that's saved for that checkpoint, and we're going to go and store it in the instance, much like we do with all these other variables like the camera position and the current player position and everything like that. So we're not the current, but where we want the player to reside when the checkpoint gets caught, when he starts from the checkpoint. So we're going to need to save that teleport Y location too. Then down here in our update scene, so this is called, like when the scene starts, it's going to say, hey, checkpoint manager, where should everything be updated to? And down here on our player controller, that's when we're going to call that set teleport landing Y location of whatever we have that was set in the checkpoint. So we're going to pass that over to our player, and the player is going to have a new teleport landing Y, along with obviously, like right here before that, this was originally here, the new position for where the player is going to be repositioned when the scene starts if they pass through the checkpoint. And the last edit on this script is actually going to be in the reset manager function, so we're going to just basically set the teleport Y location to a 0 value, much like we basically zero everything else out on here when we're resetting the manager, so it doesn't, none of these settings get carried over. So this is like if we're like switching scenes or whatever. So we're going to zero out the Y location. So now to see this in action, we're going to update our checkpoint teleport Y location. So what I've done is I jumped ahead in here. I need to get this where he's standing. So basically it's this value here. So I'm going to copy that, and then I'm going to go into my checkpoint here, and you can see down here I have a teleport Y for the player. That would be the value that I want this checkpoint to retain. So obviously if I die right now, it's not going to remember this, so I actually have to stop this. And then I'm going to paste that in there. And then we'll just save it for the heck of it. And then we're going to start this up. But before we can start this up, I'm going to move my player, which is actually, I already know this number, it's going to be 888. So he's going to be above, over there. He's going to be basically sitting up over here. So he's going to be up in here in this area here. So actually, if we actually move him, 2784, 888. Oops. Wrong key. So I'm just going to move the player, move him back, just to make sure that that's the spot that we want him at. Yeah. So he's going to basically be above the death spikes and up into this. And just to prove my point, just go into a solid, but not in the death spikes. So we're going to just change, we can just move from the back. We go back over into the checkpoint. We'll just move him to 9. So when we get into the checkpoint, he'll basically be up here. Okay, so I'm going to jump ahead. Alright, so I'm in the, I've hit the zone, so I've reached a checkpoint. I'm going to die now. Now we're going to look at the scene here. So this is where I'm starting. And you can see I passed through the death spikes, and I landed here on this my teleport Y. So let's see it from a better perspective. I'm just going to go die one more time. And then I'm basically teleport in. Through the death spikes, boom, landed on my Y. So that is how we're going to be able to, well, that's my solution. I mean, if you have a better way, go for it. So that's my solution for teleporting through instant death and solids. So the rest of this video is pretty much to enemy changes and the whole prefab variant part. So like I mentioned earlier, I think I've mentioned in other videos, I've kind of backed myself into a corner when I started building this thing for widescreen. So I set all my prefabs and everything to 1.5 scale on the X and Y, and that obviously does not sit inside of a tile map type of world where I'm using 16 by 16 tiles and I'm zooming into a 1.2 orthographic size for the screen. So everything is like extremely jumbo sized. And because I wanted to replicate the BombMan level, BombMan's level is a tile map, and it's all my stuff is basically too big for it. So I had to think, okay, so what am I going to do? I don't want to have to redo everything. So I ended up coming up with I don't want to, I mean, it's probably, maybe not the best solution, but I mean, for this, for what we want to accomplish with this, it might be the solution that will work for this project. And so what I end up doing is we're going to be using prefab variants. Now, we already took a look at that in one of the other videos where we created a prefab variant of the HUD canvas where we basically repositioned, we ended up repositioning the health bars and the health bars. So we're going to be using that same approach for all of our enemies, all of our bonus items, all of our weapons, explosions, and our player, etc. So it sounds like a lot, and it is because we're kind of like doing it from where we, from the beginning. But once we get caught up, it's not that big of a deal because each time we create something new for the game, like another enemy, just create the prefab variant right after it, change your settings for like velocities and this and that. And it's not as daunting. But it's daunting now because we're kind of having to play catch up. And we got like 38 videos worth of stuff that we got to catch up on to be able to have it work in our glorious tile map level, size-wise and scale-wise. So we're going to start with creating folders, etc. So I kind of already did it with the canvas. But what I'm going to do is trying to figure out the best file, naming conventions for all this, but I ended up just using underscore and then this resolution. Now I know it's not really 4x3, it's 4:3, but you can't use a colon, so I'm going to think of it as a 4x3. So, and then the other ones would be 16:9, but those are the originals. So we're not actually going to rename all of our original prefabs to, 16:9. They're going to just know that those are our widescreen ones, and we're going to be creating variants for our 4:3 scale. So that is the canvas. Then we need to do it for our effects. So what we're going to do in here is we're going to just create a folder, and then we're going to create folders, and all these we're just going to call it variants. So we're going to do it on the enemies, the items, the player, and the weapons. So I'll be right back and I'll show you where they're all created. Okay, so we have them created. Okay, so there's a variants folder inside the canvas, which we already know, and that's where our HUD canvas variant is. So I also have a variants folder under the effects, a variants folder under enemies, bosses, and then one under regular enemies. So this is the variants for plain enemies. You see the paths up here. So that's the one for the enemies, that's the one for the bosses. And then what we have is one for the items, and the player, and then the weapons. So those are the variants. So now we're going to create the variants. We're going to create them for all the basic things first. So like we're going to do it for the player. We're going to create a player variant. And then we're going to create a variant for the items and the effects. And basically the enemies are going to come afterwards because there's some code changes in the scripts too that I want to do first. And then we'll apply all the variant stuff. So let's start with our player first. So with the player, we're going to right click on our player, and then we're going to create where is that at? A prefab variant. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to name it player underscore 4x3, 4x3, because this is going to be our 4x3 player. And then I'm going to put it over there in variants. And because I already have these kind of built out, I'm just going to open this up real quick. Right now, everything is basically the same thing that it's been, since from our original. And what the prefab variant is think of it as an extension of the original variant, where it takes all the properties and everything from the original, and then you could just change all these things, and then you have an alternate version. So it's not like a copy per se. It's just a duplicate. It's a extension of that, and with different values. So it's not as bloated or whatever. It's just basically a copy. So I'm going to send over my copy of the 4x3 player so we can see exactly what has been changed in here. So what you'll notice is what stands out is the scale. So the first thing I end up changing is I make my scale 1 and 1 for the X and the Y, because my original is 1.5 and 1.5. So this is my new scale. And the rest of the stuff down here is pretty much all the same. So it's going to be the same box collider dimensions, etc. And this is all the same under the rigid body. Nothing has changed there. However, there are certain things, weapon prefab, we're going to get to that. That actually has to change because we have to create that. So we're going to redo that. But we'll come back, I'll show you. So the player script, the velocity for the hyper bomb has obviously got to change because it's thinking it's much bigger. So we actually having, done a lot of, test runs with, different velocities to try and, get it kind of close to what the original game does. I've used these values, but you can use whatever you want. But just keep in mind, he's just much smaller now, so he shouldn't be chucking bombs all that far like the original velocity is. So I changed the velocity on that to 1.25 to 1.5 on the Y. And then we're going to have to create the prefab for the bomb, so don't worry about that. Rest of this stuff is all the same. And then down here is the same problem with the magnet beam, but there's no changes to any of the values on these. And then we're going to Down here, there's the weapon prefab for the bullet, and the velocity for the bullet when he's on this scale, I'm going to set it to 3 when it was originally 5. And then we have down here our move speed is going to be 0.8, which we've been using for our tile map scene, and our jump speed is 3.2, and our climb speed is going to be 0.35, which we determined in the ladder climbing video. And then I need my explode effect prefab, which we're going to create a variant of that, and our climb sprite height is 0.24. And here's our new teleport landing Y, which is 0. So I'm going to create the items, no, not the items, we should probably do the weapons next. So we're going to do the weapon variants, and then we'll do the effects variants, and then we'll come back, and then these should basically get filled in. Okay, so we're going to start with the weapons. The way I did it, same thing. You would just right-click on the original and create a prefab variant. So let's take a look at the bomb. So the bomb variant is going to be, so all these new variants for the 4-3 scale is going to be a scale of 1 and 1. And the rest of this information is pretty much the same. The explosion clip and everything. However, down here, obviously, because our prefabs were set for the 1.5 scale, this is using the Explode 2 4x3 version. So we'll take a look at those in a minute. Bullet. Bullet's also on a 1x1. So that's changed. The other thing is on all of these elements, I believe, all these different bullets, they're all using a scale of 1x1, and that's why I was saying it was kind of moot in the other part of the video, but whatever, is what it is. So these are all 1x1 scales now, and that's pretty much the bullet. Yeah, that's the only change. And then the platform beam, this has a scale, same 1x1, and the rest of it's the same. The timing is no different timing is no different when it's on this scale. So that's it for the weapons. So I'm just going to shrink that. And then what we have are the effects. So our explode effect 1, which is our small explosion, scale of 1x1. And then down here and everything else is the same. So it's basically just the size of it that's changing. Here, 1 and 1, all the same. And our explode effect 3, 1 and 1. This is the speed will be the same. I didn't change the speed. And it's using that rename of the script that we did. So those are all the explode effects. Next, we're going to do the items. So, okay, now we're going to do the bonus ball. So the bonus ball is going to be a 1x1. And we have here. So basically it's just the scale. That's really the only things I think that's changed on these. However, there is a change that has to do with these somewhere else, and I believe it's the velocity. No, actually, I did that with something else. So the velocity of them bouncing out of the defeated enemy, that's still the same. It doesn't look much different. So 1 and 1, life energy big, life energy small, then we change 1 and 1. Magnet beam, scale change 1 and 1, the rest of it's the same. Big weapon, 1 and 1, the rest of it's all the same. And then the small weapon, 1 and 1, all the same. The weapon part, 1, and Yoshichi, 1 and 1. The rest of it's all the same. So I'm going to go take a look at my player. Hopefully filled in all those other spots because the references were missing. So now we're going to come down here. So now I got my bomb 4x3 assigned. And so you're going to want to reassign all your different scale based on the scale that you're working with. So my bomb, my platform beam, so platform beam 4x3, bullet 4x3, explode effect 3 4x3, and the rest of this is all the same from before. So my player is ready to go. The other thing that we're going to change, well, there's the enemies, but we're going to take each enemy one by one instead of all of them at the same time, because there's script changes with some of them. So we're going to look at some code in a sec now. So what I've done over, we're in the enemy controller class now. What I've done is I've basically added a bunch of public functions here where we can set the bonus item type for the enemy, the bonus ball color for the enemy, the weapon part color, the bonus destroy delay, and the bonus velocity if we want to override that. And the reason I'm doing this is because in the final video, the one after this for the BombMan stage, all these enemies are going to be dynamically added to the scene. And so I need to be able to change their properties. So like if it's a blue Kamadoma, I need to set the bonus ball color for that to blue. Or if it's a red one, it should be red, or things like that. And set the weapon part color, and then I want to change the destroy delay. So to be able to dynamically change these, I need these methods exposed in here so I can alter these properties for the enemy. So this is pretty much like the last part of the prefab variant thing, other than the enemies themselves, which we're actually going to move on to one by one by one. So that kind of ends this part on the prefab variant. I'm going to double check real quick, and I believe that is it. Yep, I believe that's it. So we're going to move on to enemies now, one by one. The first enemy we're going to update is going to be BombMan. So I'll start with the boss and then work my way down alphabetically. So with BombMan, I noticed when I was basically putting him into the tile map scene that he kind of, he's okay, he does what he needs to do, but he'd be flying through colliders and things like that. And I believe part of the reason is, well, one, he's going fast, and two, is because I have his box collider change size as he's moving. So, and I think that's part of why Mega Man was doing some weird things when he's hitting colliders too, is because the box collider's, changing sizes as it's basically touching, so it could get bigger and then collide and then move into it and you get stuck. So I'm going to try to stop doing that and keep like a more of a consistent box collider size for the entire time I have like an enemy, for the most part. Especially when they're like changing through animations. You don't want to change the size of the box collider through animations because you don't know where you're going to get stuck at that point. So with BombMan, he's kind of big, as you can see, with his box collider. So I actually end up narrowing that down. We're going to actually, I believe the X size is going to be 14. Oops. So it's actually going to bring it in like here. And on the hitbox is obviously going to be the same thing too. So this is going to be his new size for idle when he's throwing bombs. His jump sizes are going to vary a little bit, but once he switches into a jump, he doesn't change sizes as he's in the air. So when he hits a wall, he should slide down for the most part. And I was testing it, and I believe he's not as buggy as he was before when it comes to his sizes and getting stuck in places. So that's the first change. The next change is going to be inside of the code. And so what we're going to do is this distance between the player and BombMan is that's going to go because I basically made changes to all the enemies, and we're going to do this a little bit different. So this is actually going to disappear. And what I end up doing is I'm putting in a player position variable here, vector3. And then I'm also adding in this new stuff down here. So I'm going to have this new one. I hard-coded this before inside of his logic. So I'm making this a serialized value. So it's going to be the attack distance. So when Mega Man is greater than or equal to this value, that's when BombMan basically jumps away. And if he's closer than that, he or it's actually when he's farther than this, he throws bombs, but when he's within this and like this is less than this, that's when he actually jumps away. Sorry. Bomb height, which I actually hard coded, but I need to be able to change that value because of my prefab, my prefab variant. Target offset, same thing. I need to be able to change that, so now that's a serialized. And my posing velocity for my when I toss my bomb up needs to be exposed because obviously that's going to be different based on my scale. And I actually had these jump velocities down in his jump. I've moved them out, so now that they're up here. So now this is all up in the top part of the class, and they're exposed through serialized, so you can actually change them in the inspector. The first change I'm going to do is much like I did with the player and I'll be doing with the other enemies. The raycast distance for the box cast is instead of being the 0.05, it's now going to be 0.025, so half of that distance. The next change is going to be down in the update where I'm going to check and see if the player is not null. I'm going to capture the player position into this variable. Before I was basically using the player position throughout in other places, but I want to make sure it's null. So if the player happens to be null, it's not going to update the position, so it'll just keep remembering the last position in that case. Otherwise, if the player is still around, it'll keep updating this, and then we can react accordingly. So down here, what we're going to do, so instead of the player.transform.x, I'm using my new variable here to check the x to see where he is in relation to BombMan. My next change, which is a little bit lower, is that I'm going to be using the player position to determine the distance, where I believe I was using player.transform position. So we're just going to use our variable that we created. And then instead of using the 1F hard-coded value, we're going to use attack distance, the attack distance variable. Next thing I did, we're still in the update, by the way. I just commented out the R key for the to do the pose, and I think I said we're going to remove it in the boss fight video or something like that, but I never did. I'm just going to comment it out now, so the R key will do nothing. Now down here in my launch, I'm using my new target offset. I think before I basically declared a float here and add a value, but we're going to basically use our serialized. So we're going to use our target offset. And then we're going to pass that here along with our bomb height, which was hard-coded to, I believe, 1F. So now we can use those from serialized fields. Inside of toss bomb, we remove the new vector, and I'm using my toss velocity that's up declared at the top. Then down here in our jump, because we declared these velocities at the top, we're going to actually remove this. We don't need those anymore. Save that change. And finally in the code, after enable AI, I add in some more publics here so I'll be able to manipulate BombMan through code. So I can set my attack distance, set my bomb height, set my target offset, set my toss velocity, and then set my vectors. So now I should be able to manipulate all his settings through code so I can dynamically create him in a scene. So coming back over to the inspector, we have new fields here that we declared as the serials. So we have the attack distance, the bomb height, the target, and the toss velocity, as well as our jump velocities, which are here. So now we have everything kind of in place where we can actually do our prefab variant. But before we do that, we're going to edit his animations. So I've already edited them, but what I'm going to do is, I think it's quite a few. So I'm not going to go through each of what they currently are. I'm just going to send over the changes, and then we're going to take a look at what they're going to be now. Okay, so the changes have been sent over, so now we're going to look at his animation. So looks like I've removed all the box collider and offset stuff. So I'm going to expand his hand here. I don't think the hand hasn't moved. But this is now his new box, and we're not going to override it inside of the animation. So that's the idle animation. We don't do anything with the intro because that's part of the stage select screen. Jump 1, it looks like, I believe, we have down here actually? 16 of 14. It looks like I do slightly alter his box on his jump. So anyway, so the new offset for his X is going to be 0.016 on jump 1, and then the Y is going to be 0.14. Hand position hasn't changed. And the offset for the hit box is obviously going to be the same thing. So this is where his new box collider is going to be on this jump pose. The second jump, let's take a look. It's going to be this offset. Okay, so obviously moved over. So negative 0.022 on the X offset. This is all for the BombMan's box collider, not the hit box. And then the Y is going to be 0.14, and then the same thing. So basically, it's the same thing for the hit box position and for the offset. And then what we're going to do with the jump 3, it's the X offset of 0.026 and 0.14 for the Y, and the same for the hitbox. So the offsets that changed, not the size. And then on the pose, it's his default, which is the 0.14 and then 0.22, so that doesn't change. I just removed whatever was in here. I think there were overrides, took those out. And then the throw, same thing. Same dimensions, just removed. It's going to be using the original box collider size, and I removed everything from the animation. So those are the animation changes for this guy. So now with that, we're going to move on to creating his prefab variant. So now we're on his prefab variant. The scale is going to be 1:1. And we're going to see if there are any changes down here, which I believe there are. So obviously now his Explode Effect 3 is going to be the 4:3 size version. Is taking damage, and defeat events are now based off of the 4:3 game object or prefab. His bomb prefab is going to be the 4:3 version. His attack distance I shortened a little bit to 0.8. His bomb height is now going to be 0.4. Target offset is now going to be 0.2. And his toss velocity for his posing is going to be 2.4. So these are his changes. This is our 4:3 scale BombMan that we're going to use. So that basically does it for this segment. The next enemy is going to be Adhering Suzy. And the only change I made with that code is in the actual fixed update. So currently, the move speed is used with the approach speed if there is a raycast type of collision detection wanted. I noticed, I don't know, I didn't see it before. I don't know if it was really there, but with the widescreen version, it didn't seem to have any problems. But when I was using this enemy in the tile map, it was slowing down on the collision type of, well, no collision, basically just using the and going to two different positions, so using the position method. So I ended up basically adding in a check in here, much like I basically do right here, looking for the stop method. So if the stop method is not is a collision, then that's when I want to execute this code. And this is the revised version, so all I did is just wrap this block that was already there within this if. And then the slowing down when you're doing the stop method of position, it doesn't happen. So that's the only change I made in the script. So I created a prefab variant of this enemy. Scale is going to be 1:1. And the rest of the settings, well, obviously the explode effect will be the 4:3 version. So you're going to want to reassign that. So that's explode effect 1. And then the rest of it's all the same, so the speeds and all that, I mean, you can modify this if you'd like, but I'm not going to be using the collision version of the detection. I'm just going to use the positions instead. So I didn't feel like I needed to really change any of this stuff up here. So that basically does it for the changes for Adhering Suzy. The next enemy we're going to change is Big Eye. So Big Eye has some code changes that I implemented, and then we're going to do those first, and then obviously then we're going to make some changes to we're going to create the prefab variant. So let's do the code first. So the first thing I did is I added a new vector 3 for player position, much like the BombMan. I'm going to do this for all the enemies that basically need to look where the player is. So we added that in. I also added in the enable AI because it came later, so be able to control their Big Eye's AI to turn them on and off. The jump delay I turned into a public, so you can access it through the inspector. Let me see here, what else was there? The jump velocities, I also made that public so you can access those through the inspector. And I believe that's everything that I changed for the top here. The next change is down here in Start, where I'm going to look for the, well, actually I believe that was already there. Let me double check, hold on a sec. No, that's correct, this is new. So we're going to get the player and save the player in here. And then down here in fixed update, this is going to actually become 0.025 for the box cast raycast distance. Then down here in update, I add in the if enable AI, which is going to basically wrap all his AI code here. And inside here before this is if is grounded check, I'm just going to check and see if the player is not equal to null. And then we're going to update the player position variable, and if it happens to be null, then obviously we won't update this. And it'll just remember whatever the last position was before the player died, or was removed from the scene. And then I believe it's used in here. Yeah, so here was probably the player transform position X, but we're going to basically use it from that variable. So this is updated here. And I believe that's it for his logic. I didn't change anything else. It's basically this check here and then the wrap everything that was already there within the if enable AI. The last change is to add in the public void for the enable AI, so you can turn his AI on and off through code. And so those are all the code changes for Big Eye. And now we created the Big Eye prefab variant for the 4:3 scale. Scale to 1 and 1 on the transform. And the rest of this is all the same, except down here is obviously going to be explode effect 1 on the 4:3 scale, so you want to use that version. And the rest of it, everything, the delay is the same, regardless of what size it is, a quarter of a second. And so that basically does it for Big Eye. The next enemy we're going to work on is Blaster. There aren't going to be any changes to the box gliders or anything like that, but we will be making changes to the code. The first thing I did is add some new variables to the top. Game object for our player, position of our player, the enable AI, serialized bool, and also we're going to be adding in a delay time before the first attack. So if you actually look in the BombMan stage, when he comes up the first ladder, there are 4 blasters there, and 2 of them start before the other 2, and so they're kind of like offset. So that's what this is going to try and mimic. So we added in this start delay float. Then I end up making a change in the start method here. Set orientation, originally it just sets it based off whatever the orientation is set through the inspector. However, we're going to allow it to be changed from code. So we're going to pass in the blaster orientation. So it's actually a parameter that we haven't added yet. That's why there's the red line. And then we also get a handle to our player so we can see where the distance is and all that between the player and blaster is. And then just jumping down to the bottom here first, So this is the new changes to set orientation. So we pass in the orientation and pass it over to the blaster orientation variable. The rest of this is all the same. And then in the update, we're going to use the enable AI, so all his logic is wrapped inside of that. We're going to check and see if the player is a null and store the player's position in the player position variable. Then we're going to check the start delay. If it happens to be greater than 0, then we're just going to subtract time delta time from it and then exit out until it's while it's greater than 0. Otherwise, we'll fall through and then be able to do his code. And then down here, we're going to check his distance and we're going to use the player position and do their usual stuff. This is nothing. This is all the same. And that's pretty much all the same code except for this little part here and the enable AI. And last but not least, then we have the public methods, so we can change them through code, enable AI, change the start delay, or set the start delay, set the close delay if we want to, and then set the player range for where the attack starts and all that. And this was already there, set color, so it's already been there in the first place. So that's pretty much everything with the code. And back over into Unity, we have created the prefab variant for Blaster for the 4:3 scale. Scale is going to be 1 and 1 for the X and the Y. The rest of this is all the same up here, except for the explode effect. And this guy uses a bullet, so we use the bullet 4:3 scale as well. But otherwise, everything else is the same. So that'll do it for Blaster. Next on the list is Bombomb, and there are actually no code changes to Bombomb. All we're going to be doing is just creating the prefab variant and setting up all the game objects that it happens to call, so we're going to do that now. So we created the Bombomb launcher prefab variant, and we've actually created the prefab variants for the bomb itself and the shrapnel. We're on the launcher right now. So with the launcher, there is no scale, because it's kind of like it's an invisible object that just basically has a point where the bomb launches from. So there's nothing up here that's any different. The only thing that's different with the launcher is the bomb prefab, we use the 4:3 scale version, and the shrapnel prefab, we use the 4:3 version, and then we have some different velocities for the bomb and the shrapnel. So the bomb's actually going to launch up to about 6.2 on the Y velocity, so it's roughly about the same as how it happens in the BombMan level. And then the two middle shrapnels that come down, actually when I was watching it, it's more level with the outer ones. So they're just a little bit higher up and a little bit closer in. So these are the values I approximated. So when it launches up, they kind of land approximately in the same places as in the BombMan level, the shrapnel pieces. So the next prefab we'll look at is the bomb itself, and so that does have a scale because there's a graphic involved. So that's going to be scaled to 1 and 1 for the X and the Y. The rest of everything else is the same with it, except however the explode effect is going to be 1 on the 4:3 scale, and they're going to change the shrapnel prefab that it points to the 4:3. Otherwise, everything else is the same. And the last part of Bombomb is the shrapnel. So the shrapnel also has a sprite here, so the scale is going to be 1:1 for this 4:3 resolution. And then we're going to come down here where everything else is basically the same. We're going to change the explode effect prefab to the 4:3 scale on the 1. And we're going to just set the bomb prefab to 4:3, even though this thing doesn't spawn it, just keep everything consistent. So that's basically it for Bombomb. Like I said, no code changes, so pretty easy to copy over to a different resolution. Next enemy is going to be Gabyoall. So this one also no code changes, so there's not going to be anything with that. And so all we're going to do with this one is to create the prefab variant. So with the prefab variant up, the scale is going to be 1 and 1. The rest of the settings are all basically the same, except when we get down here, we're going to be using the explode effect 1 prefab. And down here, I'm going to change the patrol speed so it's a little bit slower. So it's going to be 0.4, and the chase speed is going to be 3 times that, so it's going to be 1.2. Otherwise, the rest of it, the settings are all the same. So pretty simple one. We're going to move on to the next one. Now we move on to Kamadoma. And Kamadoma is going to have some code changes, kind of one of those earlier on enemies. I believe the Enable AI might be one of those changes. So we're going to move to the code, and then we'll deal with the prefab variant after that. Nope, my mistake. This one actually does have the Enable AI. I just ended up moving it up higher. So we're going to have a game object for our player and the player position. So because Kamadoma jumps around in search of the player and getting close to the player. And down here I add a public to the jump delay so you can edit it through the inspector. I also do the same thing for the jump vectors. So that's also a change. You can change those through the inspector. In the start method, I get the player so that we can use that to get the position and everything. And then down here in fixed update, I'm going to update the raycast distance to 0.025, like the other enemies that have ground checks. Now down here in the update, because we did this in start, we're going to get rid of this, the getting the player. We only need to do that the one time. And then we're going to get the player position if the player isn't null. And then we're going to use that down here in this check in which direction that Kamadoma should jump. So that's pretty much it for the code changes on Kamadoma. Back over in the inspector, we have a prefab variant created for Kamadoma. We got the scales 1 and 1. Rest of the settings are all the same, except the explode effect prefab is going to be the 4:3 resolution, so I'm going to update that. And down here we added in the jump vectors. The delay is the same, however, because it's a different scale, I've updated these jump vectors to approximations of what it would be like in a 4:3 scale. So I used 0.8 and 3.2 for, I believe this is the higher jump with shorter distance, and then this is the lower jump with longer distance. So 1.8 and 2.8. So that basically does it for that enemy. We're almost there, at the end anyway. Next one is Killer Bomb. Killer Bomb has a couple of code changes, and then we'll create the prefab variant. Only thing new here is I added the Enable AI at the top. And then in the update, wrap all his logic in an if statement for the Enable AI. And then a public method to enable AI through code. And those are the only changes in his file. For his prefab variant, we're going to do scale 1:1. We're going to update his explode effect, which is actually, he uses number 2, which is the bigger version than 1. So you're going to use explode effect 2 on the 4:3 scale for this guy. And then I changed his distance to 0.8 for the Bezier curve. And that basically is it for him. Next is Mambu. There's going to be a couple of code changes in his file. Other than that, we're going to then the prefab variant, and then that pretty much will do for him. So in the top of his file, we're going to add in the enable AI bool serialized, and then inside of his update, we're going to wrap all his logic inside of an if for the enable AI. Everything else is the same. And then we're going to have a public method here, enable AI, so we can turn him on and off his thinking with code. And last for him is his prefab variant, so scale 1:1. He's going to have the small explosion 1 at the 4:3 scale. He's also going to use the 4:3 scale bullet. And then I change his move speed to 0.8. Other than that, that's all there is with him. Now we're on to the metal enemy, Metall. So with him, a couple code changes and a prefab variant. So here I add in another game object for the player because we need to know where the player is at and the position of the player up here in the top of the class. Then down here in the start, we're going to get access to the player and save it. And then in the update, I'm actually going to remove these two lines here. And we'll save that, and we're going to add some new stuff. So we're going to get the player position of the player as a null and save it in the vector3, and then we're going to do the player distance and see what that's at. And then down here where the is facing right, we're going to use that vector3 that's got the player position in it. So that's it. There are no more changes in this file. And in his player prefab variant, scale 1:1, the where's it at? Bullet speed I changed to a 2. The prefab bullet prefab is going to be the 4.3.1. The explode is going to be explode effect 1.4.3. And otherwise, all these delays that he has with shooting and opening up and all that, that's all the same. So no other changes for him. Next on the list is Pepe the Penguin, which is basically the exact same changes that Killer Bomb has. So we're going to do the code and then we'll do the prefab variant. In his code, we're going to add in the enable AI bool. And then down in his update, we're going to put all his code inside of this if for the enable AI. And then down here, we're going to add in the public enable AI method so we can turn his logic on and off through code. And having created his prefab variant, his scale is going to be 1:1. And there is explode effect prefab is going to be explode effect 1 on the 4:3 scale. And his Bezier distance is also going to be 0.8, just like Killer Bomb. And that'll do it for this guy. Next up is Screwdriver. Screwdriver has some code changes, and we'll create the prefab variant. So at the top, we're going to add in the player game object to capture that and the position of the player. I also add in the enable AI bool, and I change his open delay to 1/2 a second from 1/4 of a second, just for the heck of it. And then down here in the start, we get the player, and in the update, we're going to wrap all his logic inside of an enable AI, and then we're going to get the player position if the player isn't null and save that. And then down here in the closed, we're going to check the distance to the player position and see if that's one we should open or not. And the rest of that's the same for the logic. And then other than that, we have the enable AI bool function to turn it on and off through code. And finally with him, in the we're going to do the prefab variant, and it's going to be scale 1:1. Going to have a bullet speed of 2, the bullet 4:3 scale one, and then the explode effect 1.4.3 scale. And down here we have the open delay of the 0.5, and I changed the player range to 1. And I'm not sure why these are dark like that, but they should have been the same. Anyway, those are all the changes for him. And we finally reached our last enemy, and that's Sniper Joe. So Sniper Joe is going to have actually quite a few code changes, because when I was testing him out in the tile map level, he was slipping and sliding and doing all kinds of weird things. So I made some changes so hopefully he doesn't bug out anymore. And let's go look at the code. So the first thing I add in is game object for the player and to get the player position. The rest of this is the same except for this is new. This is like what we did with the player for that jump flicker animation problem. So we have a bool in here called jump started. So he's going to use a coroutine like the player does to make sure that when he leaves the ground it gives him enough time to actually leave it. So we're going to make use of that again. Now in his start, I originally had it where he started as a block, but I ended up taking that out so we can have him start well, I haven't really tested it, but have him start with anything. So if he's in the air, then if he lands, he'll basically then go to a block or and choose his logic, etc. So we're just going to say do action is true here, so that the first thing he does is pick an action, and action timer we're going to set it with the delay, but by our default it's set to 0, so we should just pick an action right away. And then we're going to get the player object to see where we can find out where the player's position is and everything. And inside of fixed update, we're going to change the raycast distance to 0.025, and then I'm going to add in here if he's not jumping, then we shouldn't be looking for ground. And this part right here for the jumping falling doesn't really work right, so that's actually going to go bye-bye. So then we're going to nuke that. Then down in the update, we're going to get rid of this because we already have that in the start, so we're going to save that. We're also going to get rid of this is not jumping part, so it's just is grounded. We're going to save that, and then we're going to change it from looking at the player's transform. We're just going to use our player position that we have up here. And what I noticed when he's on the tile map is he slowly starts sliding. I couldn't really tell that much with the widescreen version, but on this tile map he does start slowly slipping, so I'm going to keep him constant 0x so he doesn't move around when he's grounded. And down here when we're not grounded, we're going to put in is jumping is equal to true. So this is what his jump function currently looks like, so we're going to update that now. And much like our player, what we're going to do is we have this coroutine down here called jump. So what it's going to do is it's going to set jump started is equal to true. It's going to wait for fixed delta time to pass, and then it's going to change jump started to false. So it gives our cells, our box cast, a chance to leave, not do the ground check and touch the ground. So that's basically all the changes there are for his code. And last but not least, then we created a prefab variant on a scale of 1 and 1. And the rest of this is all the same, except he's going to have the bullet of the 4-3 and explode effect 1 of the 4-3. And changed his jump vector, so his jump straight up and Y is the same as the player, so it's 3.2. And his jump forward and jump Y is the same as the player, so it's 0.8 and 3.2. Other than that, that's it for him, and that's it for all of our enemies. And we finally reached the final segment of this video. So if you followed along up until this point and done all the enemies and the explosions and the items, and you got all these different prefab variants, then you're probably thinking, okay, great. So I got all this stuff, so how am I going to be able to use it all? So what we're going to do is we're going to make changes to our game manager and asset palette, and what we're going to do is some mock version of a picking which scale you want. And what will happen is inside the scene you're going to basically tell it which scale you want, and then it can serve up whatever prefabs that you want, or what scale is set, and then those corresponding prefabs will basically be used. When I build the BombMan stage, however, I'm just going to have all the prefabs that I want. Basically, I'm just going to point them all because that level is strictly going to be tile map. So I'll just be using all the 4-3 scale ones for that. So I'm just going to directly assign them to variables inside of the scene. But in the case of what we're doing now, certain things are out of your control, such as when you defeat an enemy, a bonus item gets dropped. Well, by default, that bonus item was going to be the 1.5 scale for the the 16:9 resolution. So what we're going to do is we're going to tell the scene, these are the scales I want, and so these are the scales that I should see. And so that's what we're going to do in this next part. The very first place we're going to start is inside of the asset palette script. So what we're going to do is we're going to have, right now we have this enemy prefabs and we have this item prefabs. And so what we're going to do is we're going to have a different game object array for each resolution scale that we're going to be using. So we'll make those changes first. So here we have enemy prefabs for 16.9. There's going to be 13 of them. Same with the enemy prefabs for the 4.3. It's been a while since I've updated the enemy list, so now I have all my enemies in here. And down here I'm going to have the item prefabs for 16.9 and the item prefabs for 4.3. So now we just have to reassign everything in the game manager. But before we can do that, we're going to have to resolve our errors that we have in the game manager that the asset palette now has, because it's been changed. There are things that are out of whack inside of the game manager. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create arrays for the enemy prefabs and item prefabs, which we will basically populate these with the resolution choice. And speaking of resolution choices, what I'm going to do here is I created a new enum called resolution scales. I got a scale of 16.9 and a scale of 4.3. Those are the only two that I have right now. If I was to ever add on to this, like 5.4, 16.10, etc., I'd probably want to definitely add to this and then have prefab variants for all those different scale resolutions. And then I have this variable here is basically going to default to 16.9. And then we will go on to the next part. And what I've done is I've created a public void here called set resolution scale, so you can basically update it through code. Granted, yes, it's public up above, but I'm just going to be calling it through the function to make the changes. Now, even though we don't use spawn enemies anymore, I still have to update this. So what's going to happen here is this is the new part right here. It's going to check and see what the resolution scale is, and then it's going to do is it's going to go look at the asset palette and grab the array of prefabs that are assigned there and then dump them into the local variable, the class variable for enemy prefabs, and then we can use them from there. So technically, I mean, this maybe should probably be in its own function, but you can basically change the resolution scale on the fly, and then each time this spawn enemies is called, it's just going to reassign the array. So you can do it, on the fly and just call it whenever you need it. You want to fly between 16.9 and go to 4.3, so something along those lines. And then the other part down here is we use enemy prefabs. So before it was asset palette dot enemy prefabs. Well, we're just going to use the one we have locally, and it's the same exact. It's just a copy. So we're going to just instantiate from there. So those are the changes for the spawn enemies. And the last part on this file is going to be the get bonus item. Now this is the one where you don't have the control, and now you do. Because everything was set to certain, the asset palette was already assigned to specific ones, well now you're going to assign them based on scales. And then your resolution scale inside the game manager is basically going to say, okay, well which scale of array or asset palette should I use for those prefabs? So same difference, we're going to basically take the array of the prefabs from the asset palette and dump them into our local variable so that we can just access that. So instead of it being asset palette.item prefabs like it was before, we're just going to just call our local one now. So all of these down here are basically changed. It's just remove the asset palette dot that's in front of each of these, because now we're using it from this variable. So now back over in Unity in the inspector, we have the daunting task of having to assign all of those prefabs into our asset palette that's tied to our game manager prefab. So right now it's going to default to scale of 16.9, and then you have this empty list here that needs to be filled in, and then the 4.3 version, those are for the prefabs, and then or for the enemy prefabs, and then you got the item prefabs that need to be filled in. So I'm going to fill these in and I will be right back. Alright, so now if we take a look at our game manager prefab, so enemy prefabs 16.9, you're going to be using all of your originals, and all your originals are the ones that are not in the variants folders. So those are the ones that all have the scale of 1.5. The 4.3 ones are the ones that will be ending in 4.3, as you can see, like big I underscore 4.3. These ones don't have that. So you're going to assign them all. That's basically from a way long time video. You're going to match them up with the order that you have in your enemy list here. So they should be the same indexes that you fill in for each element. And then the bonus items, the same thing. So these are all the 16.9 bonus items, the ones without any suffix. And then these are the ones that are for the 4:3 scale that we've been creating through this video. And those are all assigned. And then other than that, that's pretty much it, I believe, for these changes. However, now that we have all this filled in, we have to tell our scenes which ones we want to use. So let us go and do that now. Now over in our main scene file, in our start, what we're going to do is we're going to use the GameManager instance. We're going to say our set resolution scale, and we're going to use the scale of 16:9. So that basically is going to tell the GameManager that all the bonus items and everything, and if we decide to pull the enemy prefabs out of that, we're going to want the 16:9 ones that are assigned. So that's what we'll basically do, we just do it in the start. And in the BombMan stage, we basically do the same thing in the start, except this one we're going to be using our 4:3 scale because we have everything smaller there. So with that done, what we will do is we're going to try it out. We will start with the main scene. I have to reopen the window. Okay, and then let's just add on the game. It's going to be 16:9. And what we'll do then is we're just going to activate some of these guys. We'll just, no, not that guy. He's a pain. And then we're just going to start this up. Oh, that's right. I didn't set the drop on this one. Hold on a sec. So what happened is I didn't set my teleport Y, so he shot through the platform. Anyway, we've updated that. And I didn't do any of the checkpoints, but you know, I'll have that for the final project. And I think I just lost my Kamadoma. So let's just start that again. Hopefully he drops something when we shoot him. There we go. So that looks like it's the right scale. And then the other one that's down here. And that's the smaller one. Okay. So that is for the widescreen. Let's take a look at the tile map version. Okay, so I had to do the same thing here. So I updated my Y landing location for my, basically my intro here. So I'm going to teleport in. We're going to kill this Kamadoma up here and see what size he drops. And unfortunately, of course, he wouldn't drop anything, would he? Let's try it again. There we go. And that's a bonus ball that looks like it's the right size. So what I'm going to do is to prove that this is really working the way that it's supposed to. This is the BombMan stage file. We're going to do scale 16:9. And I'm going to run it, and now if he drops something, it should be the really big version. And look at that, the bonus ball is really big. So that's the 16:9 scale. And, oops, I'm going to just change that back. Save. And let me double check that I didn't forget anything. 1 minute. Nope, I believe that was everything. So this, this basically is how my remedy for having the different scales. I mean, maybe there's probably way better ways of doing this, but I'm just going to stick with creating a bunch of prefab variants and then determining which ones I want to use based off of a enum selection. So now I can basically build out the other skills if I want. I could probably even build in, I'm going to switch screen resolutions and then dynamically change my, stuff on the fly. So, but that would be for another video. And so this brings us to the very, very, very end of this video. Seems like is a very, very long bunch of segments that I'm going to put together, and I honestly at this point don't really know what the total video length is going to be, but what I'm going to do is I will probably have to figure, I've never done it before on YouTube, but I'm going to have little links that'll jump to the sections so that you don't have to like try and pan around trying to find them, for each segment that I've been basically putting into this video, so I'll make it a little bit easier. So anyway, this is the next to last video. The next one is actually going to be on rebuilding the BombMan stage as close as I can fake it to the original. And that's, I don't know how long it's going to take to work on that, but I'm going to see week, 2 weeks maybe, but that'll be the very, very final video of the series. That'll be number 40. I wanted to end on a even number. So that's why there's really this video. So after that, I'm going to do, a video here, a video there. It's really not going to be any set schedule because I'm actually going to be moving on to a different game to try and copy or replicate or whatever, or duplicate, whatever you want to call it. And I was thinking of doing Mike Tyson's Punch-Out. So, because it's, it's different. It's not like a shooter. It's not like this. It's not like Metroid, and it's a little bit different, and I think it's got a lot of animations involved, and it'd be interesting to try and do a game like that. So that's going to probably be my next one. If not that, then maybe Castlevania. I don't know. I haven't really committed, but I'm really leaning towards Mike Tyson's Punch-Out. So there are a few videos, Mega Man-wise, that I'll probably be doing. I want to do, there's a request to do the slide, so I'm going to do the slide. I'll figure out how to do that and put that out there as an addendum because it's not in Mega Man 1, the original. And that's kind of like what I've been following for all the little mechanics and everything like that. There's a request for Blaster 2, I believe, and I don't remember exactly Mega Man that was, maybe Mega Man 6. I don't know. But I'm going to do that, and then there's a couple other requests for other things, and then after that it's just going to be, maybe Yoko